Wonderful. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kelly Boyce Heimbaugh. I serve as president of the Chautauqua Women's Club. Welcome to our Contemporary Issues Forum lecture. We have a great lineup of speakers this season, right here every Saturday at 2 p.m. through week 8. I hope you can join us. We are thrilled to be back in the Hall of Philosophy. It's great to see everyone. We have not been here since 2019. Also, I hope you had a chance to watch us virtually, some of our lectures on the CHQ Assembly platform. We are grateful to Chautauqua Institution for inviting the Women's Club to participate in the Assembly series. And I actually want to especially thank the production team for their professionalism and hard work, and thank you to the team that's here today recording us. For 133 years, the Chautauqua Women's Club has provided innovative programming, dynamic events, leadership opportunities for women, and life-changing scholarships for students. Our legacy is one of significant influence, both on the grounds of Chautauqua Institution as well as outside in society. Here at Chautauqua, CWC initiated such activities as the Poetry Contest, which influenced the formation of the Writers' Workshop. We were also a significant supporter of the Music Society, a precursor of the Chautauqua Symphony Orchestra. CWC members were a force for growth of the Chautauqua Scientific and Literary Circle, and our influence could be seen in society through leadership of the women's suffrage movement, the League of Nations, the Equal Rights Amendment, as well as safe working conditions for employees. We have always provided women with leadership experience, and this influence was acknowledged by our favorite CWC member and First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, when she invited over 900 members to the White House for a luncheon in 1933. This year, CWC has donated $45,000, and to date, over $1.7 million to Chautauqua Institution in scholarships to students attending the Schools of Performing and Visual Arts. We're very proud of that. If you are a member of the Women's Club, we thank you and encourage you to get involved. Volunteering is the easiest way to meet new friends. If you are not yet a member, please consider joining. We would love to have you. Our membership table is over there. You can visit us down at the clubhouse, down by the lake next to the Athenaeum. And did you know that we have over 100 men as members? We are a welcoming community to all. And that is why we are known as the heartbeat of Chautauqua. And we thank you for your support. For a list of our events, please pick up a trifold brochure over at the table or check out our website, chautauquawomensclub.org. For the first time ever, Chautauqua Women's Club is participating in the Chautauqua Dialogues program at 3:15 at the Hall of Missions. If you'd like to discuss your reaction to what you hear today in a facilitated small group, please sign up at chautauqua.org/dialogues, or we have the CR codes at the membership table. Later today at 5 o'clock, we have a meet and greet wine and cheese reception for Joan. She will share a few more words of wisdom at our beautiful clubhouse down by the lake. The cost is $25 per person. Capacity is limited, and you can pay at the door. So this concludes our announcements. I am so thrilled and excited to introduce Joan Garry. She will talk for approximately 45 minutes, followed by a 15-minute or so Q&A. After her talk, please queue up at the 2 microphones right here. And please, only 1 question per person to allow others the chance to ask questions, and please refrain from follow-up questions. A book signing will immediately follow over at the table. So, my favorite part. Joan Garry. I am delighted to introduce our first speaker of the season, Joan Garry. I'm confident that many of you have already heard about Joan Garry, as she is a national champion for the nonprofit sector. She writes a highly popular blog for staff and board leaders called joangarry.com, reaching over 100,000 folks monthly from over 150 countries. Her blog is smart, actionable, authentic, and funny, just like Joan, and is written specifically for staff and board leaders. Joan has the #1 nonprofit podcast on Apple Podcasts called Nonprofits Are Messy. And she is the author of Joan Garry's Guide to Nonprofit Leadership. Joan began her career as part of the management team that launched MTV in 1981 and left corporate America in 1997 to fight for the LGBT equality as the executive director of GLAAD, one of the largest gay rights organizations in the US. This switch was motivated by her victory in a precedent-setting case in which she became the first woman in New Jersey, in the state of New Jersey, to legally adopt her partner's biological kids.
I don't know if my children would applaud, by the way.
And that goes to my next statement. Joan likes to say that their kids legally have two moms, whether they like it or not. In 2017, Joan launched the Nonprofit Leadership Lab, an online learning community for board and staff leaders of small to medium nonprofits that offers a deeper dive than her blog can. It provides access to Joan and exclusive content created by Joan and her village of experts. Full disclosure, I've been a subscriber for many years and find the lab to be an excellent and valuable resource. You can only join the lab by invitation, but I think I've convinced Joan to offer a special surprise, which hopefully will be revealed later on. So please join me in giving a warm Chautauqua welcome to Joan Garry.
So both Kelly and I are very short, and they have these things called boxes that they allow us to stand on so that when a gentleman in the blue shirt takes a picture, it doesn't look like the microphone is coming out of my nose. So first of all, Kelly, you don't have to thank me for being here. I should be thanking you. You have introduced me to the magic that is Chautauqua. So thank you to the Chautauqua Women's Club, to all the board members who are here today. I think Kelly said to us, Joan, when you get here, you're gonna kind of get it. Well, I'm here and I kind of get it. This morning I was walking along the water, and everyone is so damn friendly here. And why the hell shouldn't they be? This guy says to me, I said to him, how you doing this morning? He said, darn good. And that's how I feel today. Raise your hand. Do you feel darn good? Darn good. You're in a magical place that makes this promise. Wisdom will be gleaned, life will be enriched, and positive change is your charge. Well, there's a promise that kind of has me at hello. Because you see, nonprofits are my jam. Actually, the Chautauqua Institution is a nonprofit that happens to be led by the gentleman over there in the blue button-down shirt, Michael Hill. And so the way I think about it is that, how's everybody doing over there? Can you guys hear me all right? Good, because I want you to hear me because you're going to be involved momentarily. And so in many ways, Chautauqua's mission is my mission too. Then I started to think about this place, the Hall of Philosophy. And I thought maybe we could actually think some deep thoughts together. But then I started to think about my own college experience. Hang on a second. I'm going to put my timer on there so I don't run over, unless you want me to. So I started thinking about my college experience. So I was educated at a Jesuit college in the Bronx called Fordham University. And I was a double major in philosophy and communications. Now, my wife is very clear to tell me that I didn't need to spend any money on credits for communications classes because I never shut up. But the philosophy stuff has been a framework for me for my entire journey through life. And so it makes perfect sense that Chautauqua has a Hall of Philosophy, and I feel particularly right to be standing here. So a little philosophy 101 from what I can remember, and it was a while ago. Aristotle, he talks about virtue ethics, that what we do determines who we become, right? We are the sum total of the choices we make. That's pretty easy to get your arms around, right? And then there's ethics. And this was my particular focus. And when you think that I was a major in communications and ethics, and I ran an organization called GLAD that focused in holding the media responsible, an ethical responsibility to tell the story of LGBT lives fairly and accurately. I now know why I majored in communications and ethics at Fordham. But ethics means to advocate for the good. That's what it means. Now, we could spend like all week talking about that word good, right? And who gets to define what good is? Recently, I have not liked how other people have defined good, but I'm not going to focus on the word good today. I'm going to focus on the word advocate. Advocacy. So we've all grappled with this during the pandemic, right? What does it mean to live a life well led? What does meaning and purpose look like? In a world where 1 million people leave us. I think I needed to put my phone on silent. I suggest others do the same. What does a life well led look like when you are facing, especially when you're facing your own mortality? I mean, I'm out about almost everything in my life, but in 2020, I came out as an older American with underlying conditions. That wasn't something I really wanted to be out about, but many of us, we've been cancer survivors. We've had loss in our lives. Finding meaning and purpose matters. We have faced the fragile nature of our time on this earth. So I would argue that what we do does, in fact, determine who we become. So, Kelly told you a lot about me. I don't actually know a lot about you, even those people all the way down there. So I want to ask you a question. Actually, I want to ask you several questions. And it involves raising your hands if you are able. If you are or have been a board member of a nonprofit organization, would you raise your hand and keep it in the air? Keep it in the air. All right? If you have volunteered your time for a nonprofit organization, could you raise your hand? And keep it there. I can get pretty bossy. I went to Catholic school. I often say I was raised by nuns, which also often sounds like I was raised by wolves, but you get the idea. Okay, now, have you donated money to a cause or an organization you care about? If that's true, could you raise your hand? And lastly, if you have worked for, can you hear me over there? Mr. Green shirt with the sunglasses, hands up in the air, thank you. I'm glad you can all hear me. Okay, if you've worked for a nonprofit or a for-profit that's engaged in the social good, there are some of those, by the way, can you raise your hand and keep them raised? Look around. It's a pretty awesome group. You're an awesome group. Now you may put your hands down. Now, I have another exercise for you. Unlike any other speaker here at Chautauqua who asks you to put your phones away, I'm going to ask you to take your phone out. Take your phones out if you have it with you. This is not some cheesy selfie thing. I'm not asking you to take a picture of me and hashtag it. None of that. This is just stay with me on this, okay? And I want you to put your phone on camera, and I want the camera to face you so that you are looking at yourself in your camera. If you don't want to play along with me, I forgive you. You get the idea. Bless you. I want you to pretend you're going to take a selfie, but then I don't want you to. I want you to think about who you see in there. And I want you to think about your hands up just a moment ago. I think I know who I see. I think I see individuals who are trying the damnedest to squeeze every bit of juice out of life. I think that you are looking at a person who is advocating for the good. I think you are looking at a person who is trying to find meaning and purpose in their lives in a host of different ways. I think you're looking at a person who actually wants to leave the world better than they found it. I see a hall of advocates. You may now put your phones away, unless you'd like to take a picture of me. No, I'm kidding. Okay, now, next, I want to talk about the difference between advocates and activists. An advocate, one who supports or promotes the interest of a cause or a group. An activist is someone who takes action to achieve a social or political goal. Somehow or another, this word activist has gotten a bad rep, right? We think about the activist as the gay man who laid down on the floor of St. Patrick's Cathedral to get somebody to pay attention to the AIDS crisis. Why that's a pejorative is lost on me. Action, activism. It's not enough to support or promote. You've got to do something. And every single one of you raised your hands. So you're not just advocates, you are activists. And what I want you to try to grab your arms around is something that I hear way too often. That you are not what I call just people. And I don't mean just and righteous or good. I mean this. Oh, I just help out on Wednesdays. I'm just a board member, but Kelly really does all the work. Or, I just write a small check every year. It's really the best I can do. We need to eliminate the I just. You're not I just people. Right? The difference between I'm with you and what can I do? And I'm just really kind of fed up with this people that are on the sidelines that say, oh, isn't it nice that Sharon is on the board of blah-blah-blah-blah-blah? Isn't it wonderful? It's so wonderful that your wife, Eileen, has a community food garden. That's so sweet. No, it's not sweet. I mean, I think she's very sweet. But it's not just sweet. It's important. It gives my wife a sense of meaning and purpose. It tells her that she matters, and it means something to the people that get the kale that she delivered yesterday. And when did kale become something we eat? So I would like you to try to think about reclaiming, reframing, and talking about yourself as an advocate, as an activist, as somebody who's not on the out in the stands, but somebody who's on the field. Okay, so enough about all of you. Let's talk about me. Am I yelling? Is it too loud? Raise your hand if it's too loud. Come on. Okay. Thank you for your honesty. My wife does this. She pretends I have a volume control, and she does this at dinner parties. So, I'll talk about 3 moments. See, the thing is that I want to be heard in Montclair, New Jersey, where I'm from. And I see these people, they seem so far away, I think I have to scream to get at them. And there's a woman who read my article this morning in the Chautauqua Daily down here on a front porch, and I have a hunch that she's listening. So, 3 moments for me that turned me from, I don't know, just like an Irish Catholic kid from Amityville, New York. No, I'm not the Amityville Horror. Into somebody who is just dripping with advocacy DNA. The first one is one actually many of you probably share. The first time you've ever seen your child for the very first time. The moment you become a parent, you become an advocate for their well-being, for their safety, to make sure that the world treats them well. For us, that was a unique situation because we had to make sure the world was going to treat them well, given their unique family constellation. The second moment for me was actually the case that Kelly referenced, where I had to argue that my own daughter was my own daughter. Like, that's literally what I had to do. I had to file a case to say that the child that we raised together, with whom I was a legal stranger because there was no marriage equality in 1993, that I deserved to have a legal connection, that it was in the best interest of my daughter to be legally connected to both of her parents. I had to go before a judge and tell him what my daughter and I did all day. What I wanted to say is, well, with all the parades and the meetings, there's not much time left for like going to the supermarket. But I behaved myself. I was a mom. We won the case. And I realized that one person can make a difference. That case allowed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families through the state of New Jersey to create legal connections that did not heretofore exist at no cost. But I didn't do it to be an advocate. I did it to be an advocate for Scout. I did it to be an advocate for my kids. And this became an aha moment for me. And I decided to go and leave corporate America, my days at MTV and at Showtime, and I decided to go get a great new low-paying job. And when I got my job as the CEO at GLAAD, people said to me, "Really? I don't think of you as an activist. You live behind a white picket fence. You drive a Caravan Grande. You take your kids to Hebrew school. That's not how I see an activist." That's why I wanted you to look in the mirror, because I want you to see an activist in you, because we all are activists. If we want meaning and purpose in our lives, and if we choose to say, I want to be part of making this world better than I found it. So I joined GLAAD, and this is where I learned that nonprofits are indeed messy. Mine was a particular hot mess. There was $250 in the bank. I was so happy that I had negotiated for a higher salary. But I believed in a vision, and this, for those of you who are on boards and in organizations, I have a lot of advice about how to run your organizations more effectively. I have a lot of resources. It's not exactly why I'm here to talk today here, but at these microphones or at the reception later, I'm like the Dear Abby of the nonprofit space, so there's really not a question you can't ask me that I won't at least have a good shot at answering. But I dug an organization out of a ditch because I had a vision. I had a vision that we didn't have to wag our fingers at the media for showing homophobic and defamatory images of LGBT people, but that I could have conversations with producers and say, you know, when you do a story about finances or retirement, could you include a gay couple? Or this new show you have called Survivor, could you have a gay castaway? Why not? Now, the first year they actually had a gay castaway, and he was a jerk, and he went to jail for tax fraud, but that wasn't my fault. But I do like to say, if you think there are too many LGBT characters on on television today, you should write me at joan@joangarry.com. The other thing is that we persuaded the New York Times, something I'm very proud of, to include gay and lesbian couples on its wedding pages. These are the kinds of cultural things that change hearts and minds. Now, it is true that I thought that I'd be able to have a lot of meetings, and I don't know that I actually thought I'd be carrying a bullhorn at any point during my tenure at GLAAD, but I did on several occasions. And as you can see, I barely need a bullhorn. But I learned something about them, whether we were protesting outside the Emmys the Grammys because of Eminem's homophobic lyrics, or we were tackling Dr. Laura Schlesinger and her homophobic remarks she made on daily radio. The next time you see a bunch of people protesting, think about this. It's really just an outdoor, well-attended press conference. So all of that experience has led me, so I left GLAAD in 2005, and I was like, this nonprofit thing, everybody has to know about it. Everybody has to be a champion for the nonprofit sector. And so I became a nonprofit activist, right? So what does that look like for me? So some of it looks like I'm an executive coach for CEOs of large nonprofits, often those sort of following long-tenured folks. So I work with the Legal Aid Society, the Union for Reform Judaism, AMFAR, that list goes on and on. And the blog that Kelly referenced had this unintended consequence for me, which is that I realized that of the 1.5 million nonprofits in this country, 70% of them have budgets under $1 million, and 2/3 of them have budgets under $500,000, kind of like the Chautauqua Women's Club. That the vast majority of nonprofits are small, under-resourced, and do not have the money for coaches and consultants. And so what happened was the blog started, people started to find me, and they'd call me on the phone, or they'd email me, and they'd say, hi, Joan. So I live in Helena, Montana, and I have a Baroque music ensemble, and we are looking for funding in Montana. Do you know anybody? Actually, no, I don't. And I thought, this is such a problem. Now all these people are calling me, I can't help them. And so that's when I created the Nonprofit Leadership Lab, because I thought, oh, if I could scale my resources, I could potentially help many, many, many people who would not otherwise be able to afford the resources that I provide to my coaching clients. And so now I actually am this nonprofit activist, whether it's a large organization or whether it's a small organization. And so I'm a combination of Dear Abby, I'm a little bit of a sort of nonprofit emergency room doctor, and I love everything about what I do. It gives me such meaning and purpose. And in so doing, I have become an advocate for a sector that needs more of them. And I want to call you to think about that. To think about the fact that nonprofits are actually essential to building a truly civil society. You could come up with a whole bunch of reasons. Government shouldn't do it all. Here's one I like. Nonprofits turn towns into communities. I'm not just a collection of people that live in Montclair. We have a film festival. We have a Y. We bring people together. We care for them. We have a food pantry, right? We are literally neighbors. I'm a huge fan of Mr. Rogers. You will often see me wearing a bow tie, but they don't really work with these kind of shirts. Is that he believed that everyone is our neighbor, whether they are on the block here in Chautauqua or halfway around the world. And when we can start to think about everyone as a neighbor, there's a familial, there's a I need to help you. I want to be a part of this. And I think that the nonprofit sector reminds us of our humanity. I ended up talking to Jane, who was a poet who spoke earlier this week. And she talked about the intersection of arts and social justice. You can talk about education and lifelong learning like you have here at Chautauqua. Music, right? You're going to hear music tonight at the amphitheater, right? This is uniquely human. And it's what we missed so desperately during the pandemic and what so many nonprofits did to attempt how they pivoted to try to make sure that our humanity stayed with us. So if all of this is true, riddle me this, bad people. Why is it that the nonprofit sector is so under-resourced? And why is there a trust problem? Because both are true. So why are they under-resourced? I'll give you two reasons, but maybe we can talk some more about it. I don't think people get philanthropy. I don't think that they know that when you actually take that word apart and its Greek origins, that it means love of humanity. Love of humanity. That's what philanthropy means. I don't know what happened, but every one of you has seen philanthropy, I bet. Philanthropy at its finest. It's most enthusiastic. It's most joyful in the eyes of a second grader who comes flying home after school to say, oh my gosh, we're selling wrapping paper. We're doing a talent show. We're having a bake sale because we just learned that Manuel has Crohn's disease. And we learned about what Crohn's disease is, and it's horrible. And we want to solve it. And then that second grader asks you for money, and you can't get your checkbook out fast enough, or Venmo, or Zelle. You can't. And the joy that you feel that your kid, your grandkid, your next door neighbor has come to you, has enthusiastically invited you to be a part of this party, this cause, this mission to solve Crohn's disease? That's a gift. Where did that go? Where did it go? Because we all have really screwed up relationships to money? Okay. But that's not enough. There's a second reason I think that nonprofits are under-resourced, is they don't think big enough. And why don't they think big enough? Well, because they're under-resourced. I get that connection. But there's another reason. Boards. Boards are risk averse. They think their job often, not always, is to make sure nothing goes wrong. The try something new thing doesn't exactly square up with the let's make sure nothing goes wrong, right? The greatest gift to the nonprofit sector of a tragic and challenging pandemic is that nonprofits had to try new things, and board members had to be okay with it. They had to be. What were you going to do, Michael, right? Right, you're closed down. Like if you had said, so I remember I was working with Ellen LaPointe. She's the executive CEO of Fenway Community Health in Boston. She was told when she first started there, if they wanted to move to telehealth, it would take about a year. They did it in 2 weeks. Is we're not thinking big enough. Our boards are not allowing us to think big enough because big means we have to find more money. And then we go back to our screwed up relationship with our money. Like it's this vicious circle. And we've got to be part of the solution. We can't accept it as is because nonprofits are essential to our building a truly civil society. Let's talk about trust for a minute. Lack of trust, let's see if I say this right. Lack of trust was worse during the pandemic. Why? How could that possibly be? Trust in nonprofits was lower during the pandemic. 44% of Americans, according to a study by the independent sector, say 44% of people don't trust nonprofits. 34% of people don't trust philanthropy. Now, let's temper that a little and say, okay, people don't trust big institutions. We know that. We know that Gen Z tends to be a group of people who do not trust institutions. They have not served Gen Z very well. Who gets the press in the nonprofit sector? Big institutions, because they have the money. And so they are the ones that show up around corruption, around, oh gasp, highly paid CEOs of nonprofits. Yeah, you have people who are saving the world's biggest problems and you're actually arguing that they should make less money. There's something wrong with this. And then we also have another factor, which is that media loves bad news, right? Media loves bad news. A good corruption story? Yeah, I'll take it. Fraud? Sign me up. Are you kidding me right now? This is what the media has to talk about with regard to the nonprofit sector? During the pandemic, I didn't think I was really an older American until I started watching this ABC Evening News with David Muir. but it's instructive. It's 30 minutes, 30 minutes. Tragedy, death, destruction, horror, bad things. In the last 2 minutes of the news. Finally, tonight, America's strong. And that's when we hear about nonprofits that are changing the world. We get 2 minutes. 2 minutes. And that's just David Muir. So I think, I could have stood up here and talked a lot about how to build a strong board, how to build a really good relationship between your chair and your executive director. And I can talk about all of those things. And my book and my blog and my podcast will offer you every imaginable resource. But I just didn't want to lose the opportunity to talk about this, was that it's time for all of us who raised our hands to begin to advocate to do something for both the organizations we care about and the sector those organizations are a part of. To help them innovate, to help them think big. If you're on a board, I want you to think about the word oversight in a different way. Don't think of it as, I want you to think about it as, what if the Mackenzie Scott folks came a-calling to you and build a vision for what that money could do and then draw a plan to get there? Don't spend all your time thinking about the car you've got in the ditch, which is your organization's financial cash flow. Because nobody's all that motivated to get their car out of the ditch unless they know they're driving to either Yosemite or the San Diego Zoo. So pick one. Spend more time as a board and a staff thinking about the destination. Because then you can say, as I think I did at GLAD, because I left to about a $10 million budget with about a $2 million cash reserve, and I never laid anybody off. What did I say to them? I don't remember. I said something really good to them. But we don't want to just look at getting the car out of the ditch. We want to raise our gaze. We want to imagine what's possible. That's what organizations are called upon to do. And that's what you, as who are board members, I want you to start thinking differently about your board service. It's not just about, there's a variance between the event revenue you budgeted for and the event revenue you're projecting. How are you going to solve that? How are you going to solve that? I want you to take on a role where your board partners with you as a staff member, where you are, I think of a really thriving nonprofit like a twin-engine jet. Each engine, the board and the staff engine, is strong, and in the cockpit, the executive director and the board chair, thought partners, solving problems, where the executive director feels they can say, this isn't going so well, I need your help. It's not easy because people who decide to be executive directors and people who decide to be board chairs are type A people who are accustomed to getting 95s on their book reports. And they don't like to tell people, I don't know the answer to number 6, can you help me? That's what a real thriving nonprofit does really, really well. We need to talk up the sector. You need to talk about the organizations in your community and not take them for granted, right? When you're at home and you're at we have them now, we have barbecues again, right? When somebody says to you, are you still involved with xyz.org? Please don't just say yes. Say, I am. I love everything about that organization. We just had a terrific board meeting where we were thinking about the future of the organization. Can I tell you a very quick story? Enter story. Would you like to know more? Your job is to be an ambassador, to invite more people to the nonprofit party. Because we don't get where we need to go without a bigger army. And when someone says to you, there's such a dearth of leadership in our society, would you be kind enough to push back? Would you be kind enough to push back and get that person to think more broadly than our elected officials? Right? And talk about Kelly or Dr. Hill or any of the other people here who run nonprofit organizations and tell these stories. I hear these stories every single day. 5,000 people from North America and around the world share their stories of their missions with me. They do remarkable work with no money and no resources. I want you to name names and name organizations. Like Heidi Dressler. Heidi Dressler lives in Santa Clara, California. She rides a chair, and she runs a network all around the world of choirs. It's called the Threshold Choir, and they sing at the bedside of the dying. Talk about Heidi. Talk about Emily Clem. Emily Clem, you'd think she just runs an animal shelter on the south side of Chicago. But you know what? She thinks big. She's connected in her community to other organizations, including the domestic violence folks in Chicago. Bet you didn't know, one of the biggest reasons that women do not leave relationships they ought not be in? Anybody know? Pets. They don't want to leave their pets. They don't want to leave their pets. The dog or the cat that gives them unconditional love when everything else is going to hell in a handbasket. And so what's Emily Clem doing? Emily Clem is collaborating with, now I'm yelling, with the domestic violence shelter. And they're going to build something together that's a domestic violence shelter where women can bring their pets. Sonia Gonzalez-Friedman, New Yorkers for Children. So my wife makes fun of the names of these organizations all the time. She said, there isn't an organization called New Yorkers Against Children, is there? She's a graduate of the School of Snappy Retorts. Do you know one of the biggest problems in our society? I mean, it's a list, right? Kids aging out of foster care. Where do they go? Who cares for them? What do they do? Sonia Gonzalez-Friedman lives and breathes that issue. Or how about Dorot, a Jewish organization? It's Hebrew for intergenerational. It's run by a guy named Mark Merity. Go to Dorot, it's on the Upper West Side, and their mission is to support largely Jewish, older Jewish women who live in Manhattan independently, live on their own. And they have a building, and every Friday afternoon, you can count on it, there are chess games happening at Dorot. Might be an 85-year-old woman who's playing chess with a bat mitzvah student. And if you've ever gone into that building, the first question you ask yourself, who's teaching whom? This is what the good people who run nonprofits do every single day. So I want to go back to where we started. The search for meaning and purpose, leaving it all on the field. Two quick stories and then like a little bite of my book. Not as a promotional thing, it's just a good way to close the set of remarks. So my wife, during the pandemic, she retired. It's really hard. She was a television programming executive. She discovered Ina Garten and Rachel Ray, and she put Iron Chef on TV. But as she got older, she decided to do real estate development. So she got a real estate license. And being a realtor during the pandemic was really just not a thriving kind of a thing to do. And she said, I don't like it anyway. I want to find meaning and purpose. So she started with a suicide hotline. She got fired during the training. There's a lot of reasons, but my reason is because when she was doing the role playing, I think that she said to one of the young people who called, who was LGBT, and by the way, thank you very much for the rainbows behind me. I think she said to one of the kids, the role play kids, so I make both matzo ball soup and I make chicken noodle soup. Which of them do you like better? I can get them to you. Where do you live? So she wasn't really ideally suited for the whole suicide hotline thing. Then another organization didn't really believe her when she said, I really will do anything, because all they wanted was for her to be on the board and give money. And that's not what she wanted to do. She happily would give money, but she said, I want to do something. So my wife today is a gardening activist. She got her Master Gardener's certificate at Rutgers University and is building a community food garden that is named after a dear friend of ours who passed away during the pandemic. And she is linked up with the very well-run food kitchen in our community. And I have never seen her feel more of a sense of meaning and purpose. Stay tuned for a podcast episode with me and my wife called I Just Wanted to Volunteer. So that's my wife's story for meaning and purpose. Everybody, I think, had a journey like that. We have to make room for people like Eileen. Let them come and get on the field. Our organizations need to be better at that. Executive directors need to stop being such control freaks and let volunteers help. There are volunteers in every nook and cranny of Chautauqua because it couldn't be done any other way. But there are a lot of organizations that could be done with a lot more volunteers. So here's my second story. Bless you. It's a TED Talk. It's not a big, well-known TED Talk. This nice guy with a Long Island accent, he's an EMT. You're going to sneeze again? No, don't sneeze. The nuns used to make me stand up in front of the room when I had the hiccups and say, would you just hiccup for everybody? And then, of course, I couldn't hiccup. Anyway, so it's a Long Island emergency medical technician. His TED Talk, I'm in the back of an ambulance every day. And there are people on the gurneys, and I know it, and they know it. They're not going to make it to the hospital. It's not spoken, but they know it, and I know it. And the number one question, there's actually two questions. The first question, which is so visceral to me, is that person in the back of the ambulance looks at that EMT and says, will you remember me? And then they ask, do you think people will remember me? To a man they have never met. It's that ingrained, isn't it? We want to be remembered. The nonprofit sector offers this. No, I would argue no other sector does. You can advocate for the good. So I just want to, and honestly, I'm not reading this to promote my book because, truthfully, for anybody who's ever written a book, you make about 25 cents a book. So, but the last chapter of my book is called You Are the Champions, and I just want to read one paragraph, and then we can take some questions if you'd like. The chapter's called You Are the Champions. Nonprofits educate our young people. They deliver meals. They work to cure illnesses and fight the stigma often associated with them. Nonprofit leaders fight for equality for women, people of color, and LGBTQ folks. They provide beds to the homeless. They put battered women back on their feet. They are the storytellers who do not allow us to forget. They protect our lands. They navigate a complex world for those who are new here. They remind society of the power of religion and the power of deep faith. They bring music, theater, and dance to us. And in so doing, they make us think, they make us feel, and they lift us up. Yes, that's it. They lift us up. Each and every person who raised your hand today, you do something to lift people up. If my conversation today has reaffirmed your commitment to doing, if it has given you pause about this word activist, and maybe given you pause to maybe reclaim it for your own, if it has helped you to realize that you are the best ambassadors for the nonprofit sector, reminding people that hope lives here, that true leadership lives here. If I have done any of those things, then it will have been a good day at Chautauqua for me. It has been my privilege to be in the Hall of Philosophy with this very fine assembly of activists, and let us all commit to being remembered. Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Tell me your name.
My name is MJ. I'm a huge fan of nonprofits. I'm a huge fan of Chautauqua, and I'm a huge, huge fan of Michael Hill because he is a big thinker. And so what I'm wondering is, what is your advice for, I don't know if it's bridging the gap or something else, but I've worked for a couple of nonprofits, and they have had a hard time finding people for the positions they have because they can't pay as well as the for-profit sector. And so there is often a higher turnover. And then on the flip side of that, a lot of people don't want to donate to a nonprofit that's spending too much money on administration. So how do we balance that out as we're advocating for our nonprofits?
MJ? So first of all, no organization that has employees should be, every single organization that has employees should be arguing for fair and equitable pay for the people that work for them.
Yes.
And if your board is not doing that, then call them out on it. Full stop. So let's just start there. The second thing is that boards need to be reminded, and I've heard this way too many times. Well, they can get paid less because they're doing such valuable, they're such meaningful work. Their pay comes in meaning and purpose. Yet meaning and purpose does not pay the rent. I believe that funders need to be educated. One of the big things that I talk about a lot is communications, social media, website is thought of as overhead. Are we kidding me? Are you kidding me right now? How is it I'm supposed to grow my army of engaged people to mobilize, to raise money, if you tell me I can't actually invest in social media to grow that army? And so I just don't think, I think there need to be more people who are a big mouth like me, who are meeting with funders, and more foundations are starting to look at this world of unrestricted funding, what they call trust-based philanthropy. But I do think that we are underselling, the last thing I'll say, I do believe we are underselling, I mean, it sounds like I'm gonna talk out of both sides of my mouth. For those people who are looking for meaning and purpose, there is no better place to find it than right here. And I believe that the nonprofit sector, if we marketed that more effectively, would bring more people to the table. If we build strong cultures in those organizations where they're paid fair and equitably, and they are experiencing meaning and purpose, we won't have attrition problems. Well, do I have one last thing? Our executive directors need to be good managers.
Thank you.
I'm going over here to the man in the green shirt whose name is?
Bill,
Bill.
first of all, could you repeat the last word of your talk? I missed it over here. The last word you said, be something?
Let's be remembered.
Yeah, that's funny because that's what my mother said to me as she was the last year of her life. Will you remember me? So, yes. The Times had an article this week about fewer people going to church, especially the younger generation, how that's going to hurt financially. And it's been referred to the younger generations are not as involved. So how are you trying to bridge that gap to get the younger generations involved? Because that's where the future is. You know, we can't be with you forever, so you got to get the generations behind us involved. So how do you going to plan to do that?
How do I plan to do it? So here's some thoughts. I think that the older generation often has a really bad attitude about younger people. I coach a lot of people who run big organizations, and one of their biggest bugaboos is, those kids in their 20s, they're so entitled, I have to coddle them, right? They are a different generation. They don't trust institutions. They have to be managed differently. We have to actually bring them to the table. We actually have to hear what they have to say about how they want to be involved. We can't build an institution and expect them to want to be a part of it, right? We have to actually adapt our institutions to make room for them in a way that makes sense for them, as opposed to saying, they don't fit into my institution. So I think that we have a bad attitude about Gen Z, and that Gen Z are the leaders of tomorrow. And they've had a lousy set of experiences with institutions. So I think we have something to prove to them. I'm getting whiplash.
For the vertically challenged, My name is Judy, and I've had the honor of being the chair of a nonprofit of a wonderful scientific research organization. And one of the things that firmly believe is nonprofits are changing, and that means that the board needs to change. And yet you look at these boards and they seem to perpetuate in the same way that they've always been. And as a chair, I turned and I said, okay, we're going to look at diversity on our board. And it was like deer in the headlights. How do you recommend changing the board so that you can get those kids in and introduce new talent?
So I believe that you have to create a matrix. You have to build, just, talking about vision of where you want the organization to go. What is the ideal? So far too often, the board recruitment strategy is, does anyone know anyone who will be on our board?
Or who has money?
Or who has money, or my favorite jargon, Michael might know this, or people that are wealth adjacent. I rode the subway and I stood next to somebody I thought was pretty rich. Can I be on your board? Anyway, what you have to do is you have to stop and you have to say, remember my twin engine jet thing? That engine has to work. It can't be what I call a make way for ducklings board, which is where I'm not suggesting this is true, but like Kelly's the executive director and the board's over here. Hey, just let me know if you need anything, Kelly. I'll just follow your lead. That's not how it works. It has to be partners. So you have to build a composition matrix of your ideal board. What are the skills, the experience, the attributes, and the lived experience that will make up an ideal board? And draw it for 20 people. Draw it for 15 people. I don't really care. And then slot in who you have, right? And then put a diversity lens on top of it. So I'll give you an example. You probably can't, many small organizations can't afford a communications director or a social media person. So you get somebody, you say, okay, we could really use somebody on our board that has access to that world, who could help us think more strategically about social media and growing our army. Okay. Now let's make a list in your community, in your city, of minority-owned public relations firms, minority-owned businesses. Let's go to, if you need somebody to do strategic planning, let's go to, if you're in New York, go to McKinsey to an affinity group meeting. Affinity groups are groups of employees of different marginalized communities that gather to empower the people who work in those companies. Talk to them, cultivate them, nurture them, introduce them to your organization. And lo and behold, you might end up with someone who does strategic planning who is an African-American woman, right? Is that we're not being thoughtful. We're employing a butts in seats strategy. And then what you do is you prioritize those gaps. This year, these are the skill sets that we most need on our board. And success for the board recruitment committee will be if we have identified those folks. If you then go out to your board and you say, as opposed to, does anybody know anybody who would like to be on our board? Could you open your phones and give me a couple of names? You're saying, okay, we need somebody who knows something about strategic planning. We could really use somebody who knows something about nonprofit fundraising. Does anybody know anybody who's maybe... So I helped an organization recruit somebody who was an African-American man who had done major gifts fundraising for the NAACP, right? People are out there, but you have to think about it as intentional casting. That's the best advice I can give you. But it's not a short process, and it requires time. And if you have a small board, go and get some people that are not on your board to participate. Go find an HR person and say, I need you for the next 2 months to sit on a committee to help me think about how to cast for an intentionally great board. Last question.
Hi, my name is Alex. Thank you for your talk today. I sit on the boards of a few and a few previously progressive political groups in Texas. And I would say of the 8 or 10 most well-funded in Texas, they have lost 7 EDs in the last year and a half. So the turnover is really bad right now, probably because we're in Texas, but there's probably other things going on too. So can you talk about some sort of newer, innovative ideas on how to retain, because they're not leaving because of salary?
These are people who are working for progressive organizations in
Right,
Texas.
EDs of voting rights, voting registration, civic engagement groups.
If you're seeing a sort of a trend, right? Because I came out of the media business, like, how do we get a journalist to care about this story, right? A journalist who cares about this story, who starts to write about this, that gets read by funders, right? By progressive funders who don't want these people to leave. And so you have to think about sort of innovative ways to actually get the word out that this is a trend, and then get that word out in front of people who might be able to stave it off.
Thanks. And also thanks for your comments on risk aversion on boards. As an entrepreneur who's usually serving with all lawyers, it is hard to make lawyers be more risk-taking.
I am not a fan of organizations that have only lawyers on their boards. One more coming at me.
Hi, my name is...
Two more coming at me.
Two more coming. My name is Bev, short for Beverly. I wanted to follow up with this idea that he was talking about, this concept. And it has to do with what I consider to be the reign of terror that our Supreme Court is on now and probably will continue into the future, okay? So we think of how to address the issues that they're probably going to undermine, so to speak, mostly through the political system. But is there a role really for the nonprofits? Is there a way in which there can be a coordinated role? I mean, we have all these nonprofits and all these people over here and everything. In the meantime, you know, our democracy, our society is confronted with some real major issues, and there they are on the local level.
It's a great question, Bev, and one of the things that nonprofits historically do not do very well is play nicely together in the sandbox, right? Money drives a competitive spirit that is actually more than unflattering. And if we don't solve that, then you end up with these siloed organizations. So I think, I believe, honestly, that Gen Z doesn't think that way, actually. I actually think it's an older generation that tends to think more about my institution. I have to raise money for my institution, and I can't collaborate because that might siphon off money from over here. Gen Z thinks more like movements, right? Much more in terms of a movement as opposed to an institution. And I think we have a lot to learn from that. And then the other thing, and I'll go back to the media for a moment because it is actually my sweet spot, is that elected officials, they don't lead, they follow. And they follow, Supreme Court aside, but they follow public opinion. And when I first got to GLAAD, the most important statistic that drove me to GLAAD was that the number one way that people change their hearts and minds about LGBT people is to know somebody who is, and the number two way was the media. And I do not think we do media advocacy well enough to get the stories out about the implications of changes in laws. We don't work together well, and we don't actually, because, let's go back again, because communications is considered to be administrative and overhead, most of our organizations are underfunded in this area, so they have a harder time getting the word out. So I'd like to see more collaboration. I'd like to see this as a place where I think Gen Z has a lot of lessons to teach us. So last question.
Exactly what I was going to ask about was collaboration, because the young man from Texas, where I'm also from, there are so many organizations doing the same thing and asking for money. And if I don't get 50 emails a day asking for some progressive organization, I'm like, where do I go? What do I do? Why don't these people work together?
Yeah.
And I don't know how to advocate for that because.
Well, it depends, actually, really. So when I was at GLAD, like, there were overlapping organizations, but we played a particular instrument. We looked at the institution called the media and how we could use that. And I would say to people, if you want to advocate for ending homophobia in K through 12 schools, my man Kevin Jennings is your man, right? Is if you can actually create an orchestra, that, right? You either collaborate or you create an orchestra where everybody plays a particular instrument. So there are times when collaboration doesn't make sense because there are I had specific weapon, sort of arrows in my quiver to deal with the media, and somebody else had lawyers that were arguing in federal court, right? I remember one time Rosie O'Donnell said to me after too many margaritas, hers, not mine, why can't I just give one big check to Gay USA? And it's just not always that easy. But the collaboration piece, there aren't enough models of mergers that have worked well. I want to see more of those. I want to actually advocate for more of them. I want to see them in Stanford Social Innovation Review and Harvard Business Review. Go.
Can I just tell, in Houston, we have a collaboration for the homeless. There were so many different organizations duplicating services, and they came together, and each organization still exists, but they have a focus.
Yeah.
So one does GED, one does this, one puts people in homes, so that, they're not 4 places to go to get a GED, but it works beautifully.
Yeah, I'd like to hear
really
more
does.
about that, actually, and whether they have separate boards and sort of how they fundraise and things like that. I think it'd be really interesting. But that sounds like a great model. So, okay, thanks, everybody.